This is the story of Camp Century, the city under ice.
Camp Century is an American military base that was installed in 1959 in the northwest of the Greenland Ice Sheet, and that was dismantled in 1967. It was built as a permanent station, so there was a capacity to host up to 200 soldiers. There was a kitchen, there was a power plant, there was facilities, and when they left in 1967, a lot of material has been left on the site, and there's been some raising concerns lately about what would happen to this material, to this waste that is now buried under the surface of the ice sheet. GEUS has been asked by the Danish government to monitor what happens at Camp Century, so we now want to know what happens to that material and maybe make some projection into the future to know what will happen or what might happen to that material. There's been raising interest into Camp Century since 2016, but at that time we didn't have so much information about what was the state of that site. In the last 2 years, we've been going to the site. The GEUS team has been going to Camp Century and installed a series of instruments that now monitor the current state of the climate and the current state of the snow at Camp Century. Using those latest measurements and all those instruments that have been installed, we could now have a clearer image of what is the climate at Camp Century. Before that, we had climate models that were giving an estimation, but right now we can adjust those model outputs onto real observation of real weather data. So to conduct this study, we needed to have a clear image of what is the snow conditions at Camp Century today. So the GEUS team went to Camp Century and retrieved snow cores below the surface and studied its density and how much ice it was containing. Then we could use that data and compare it to our model and make sure that our prediction matched with the current observation. The difference between the current study and what has been done before is that now we have observations that can be used to adjust those model outputs to what is the situation right now. So here we're looking at air temperature from the 60s up to 2100, and for different climate model outputs that we've been using. If we look into the future, we see that the warming may continue in the future. Here we have 3 scenarios. One low carbon emission scenario where the curve, the increase flattens through the end of the century. A medium and a high carbon emission scenario where the warming rates continues to be the same. In 2016, we only had those thick curves here that were unconstrained, meaning that we didn't know what was the real temperature at that site. With this new study, we can actually constrain, we can adjust those model outputs to climate observations and have a clearer image of what is going to be the future of Camp Century. This new study tells us that in the next century, snow is going to continue to accumulate on top of Camp Century, and it will remain buried, and it is very unlikely that it's going to surface or to interact with any meltwater generated at the surface. Camp Century is a unique site because the American military has started in the 50s to gather surface observation, weather information. Later on in the 90s and 2000s, there were also American researchers that went to that site and also documented the conditions there. And now GEUS is continuing that work, and it gives a wealth of data that can be used to document the changes on the Greenland Ice Sheet. So actually what started as a military base during the Cold War is now turning into a science site that helps us to predict the future of the Greenland ice sheet.